Well, here we are, back with yet another tier list. Hey guys, Otaku back with another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video, and I didn't really want to do another meta tier list this soon after the last one, but realistically, the last one was a prediction of what the format was going to be, and quite frankly, I was wrong about a lot of things. It happened, sue me. But we are officially in full swing of the crossover breaker format, and a YCS has happened in the midst of the format, so let's talk about how things have actually shaped up to be. Now, for starters, I am going to take YCS Anaheim with a little bit of a grain of salt, because that was literally this weekend that crossover breakers dropped, so it's not definitive how the format's going to, shape up, but we also have had a ban list at YCS Anaheim, so things have definitely changed. And also, we've had several regionals since YCS Anaheim, so we're starting to see how the format is shaping for, the next few months. I also do want to apologize to the fact that I didn't upload a second video last week after the ban list video. I've been sick, quite frankly, and when I get sick, my voice just gets completely shot. Doesn't matter how sick I am, so I decided for the better of my health, I didn't want to make a video where I do a fuck ton of talking. However, before we do jump on into the tier list, I have noticed that a great deal of you that are watching my video currently are not currently subscribed to the channel, and if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh content, consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that bell button for future notifications, but also liking the video. I'm about 14 subscribers away from 2,000, trying to hit that before the end of this year, which is only like 15 days away, so help me out by doing so, and maybe there'll be a giveaway. I haven't quite decided yet. But with that, let's just jump on into the video. Alright, so like I did with the past few tier list videos, we are only going to be talking about decks that are essentially relevant. We're not going to be talking about Madolche, because Madolche hasn't been doing anything. As much as it pains me to say that, they're not really relevant. So we're only going to be talking about decks that have either been topping or have the potential to top, but, we haven't quite seen anything pop up yet. Just overall, just decks that are semi-relevant in the last 4 to 5 months. So to start, this is mildly relevant because the ban list touched it. Branded. Branded hasn't been doing anything for a while, but they officially hit Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, and they hit the alternative, which is the Jowgen. They still have Ido. They still have DD. They have some other DDD monster. It's not Requiem. It's Ouroboros, I think is what it is, which locks you into Fiends. Not that great in this format because we do still have Fiends running around. Obviously, it's good if you lock a Malice player or a Ryal player, but overall, Branded not doing much. Not to mention they didn't bring Branded Fusion back to 3 with the hit to the Gimmick Puppet, so like Branded's just kind of, I want to say rogue right now. Like overall, Branded's not doing a whole lot. We have a lot of decks in the format that are just able to run Shifter. They're not all running Shifter, but they are capable of doing it, which means Shifter becomes a little less impactful, but it's also being run around to keep these rogue decks in check. Branded can play through Shifter. It doesn't like to play through Shifter. A lot of its like big end board pieces cannot activate under Shifter. Like Mirror Jade just doesn't work. The Granganol doesn't do what it wants to do. Like overall, just the deck doesn't function very well under Shifter. It can play under Shifter. It doesn't like to. So overall, I just think Branded's going to take a bit of a back seat in this upcoming format. Very much so of how it has for at least like the last 2 or 3 months. And so yeah, if you want to play Branded, go at your own risk. Centurion is probably tier 2. Like Cosmic Blazar is a good card, but it's not Calamity Lock by any means. Calamity obviously has been banned for a little bit now, since like the list before this one we just got. It can play through a good handful of hand traps. However, Ghost Ogre is kind of seeing some possible play back into the format because it has some fun interactions against the Detonator. It also has some cool interactions against like other cards. Like it can be pretty good against Malice if you use it at the right time. And Ghost Ogre just kind of fucks over Centurion. Centurion though, still interesting. It can play very well under the Fool Loss, and it can kind of play well under Shifter, not like crazy, but overall I don't foresee Centurion doing a whole lot, but I could be wrong. Chimera, I kind of have to put it like tier 2, top of Rogue. Chimera, we talked about this in the last one. Shifter's running around. We can't play under Shifter. And like I have Fiendsmith, Azamina Chimera, but like this is just going to be representing all of Chimera as a whole. Just Chimera unfortunately doesn't play under Shifter like at all. It doesn't function, and neither do the other pieces that go with it. Like even if you put Melodious in here, Melodious doesn't really play under Shifter as well. Just Chimera struggles. Obviously it comes down to, they have to see it. But at the same time, Chimera does struggle against Ryal quite a bit. They can just tell you no with the field spell at a key piece of interaction that you might need. Obviously, it can help if you're going first, but I mean, we've already talked about this before. If Chimera goes uninterrupted going first, it's going to win the game regardless. It's just sets up a very strong end board. And like I said, with the branded, if you play Chimera in this current format, which, you know, I love Chimera. I'm a diehard Chimera fan, but I'm taking a step away from Chimera for this format, and if you are continuing to stay with it, you know, go at your own risk. Flu. I talked about this in the last list, and I'm kind of sticking to this for right now. Obviously, I haven't been shown otherwise, but I feel like Flu is a good, interesting tier 2 strategy, a little better than Rogue, simply because Flu can play under Fualos, no problem. It can not play under Perulia all that well, but Perulia is a side deck option. The deck still has like Featherstorm and has all these other things. The issue is that its Ryal matchup is not fantastic. The Ryal matchup's not that great because if they just go first and they set up the field spell, then whatever you try and chain block with like your banished monsters to bring them back to hand doesn't work because the field spell doesn't activate. It can negate anything, any monster in the chain at whatever leisure they want. The thing here is though is that Flu has a great matchup against Malice. If they just set up end pen, Malice doesn't really play the game. Yeah, I'm kind of sticking with Flu on the tier 2. I think it's better than Rogue. I think it's like a good choice, but it's very like matchup dependent. I don't think its matchup against the Ryal is all that great. Not to mention in Ryal, if you just go like Thode or X, I don't remember which one it is, and send Aggregator target the end pen, then you can just proceed to pop off from there. So it's like, again, I think the Ryal matchup isn't that great for the Flu deck. So it's like, you know, go at your own risk. It has potential, but, you know, it is what it is. Now, I have a picture of Engraver here because I wanted to cover, like, Fiendsmith decks, but I also ended up putting separate images for the ones that I would be talking about, so we're just going to ignore this for right now. We'll get to the Fiendsmith decks here momentarily. Snake Eye. Man, I don't know. I kind of hope this deck's dead. Like, I'm going to put this in coping because I'm really hoping it's dead. I just don't foresee a world where this deck continues to play. They have Ash and Poplar to 1. They have Original Band, which was like the main butter that was keeping the deck kind of alive and also the hit that we were hoping for ages ago. I just don't think Flame Burst is enough. So it's like, if you don't see your Ash or your Poplar, you just don't see them for the whole duel because OSS is no longer an option. So it's like if you see Wanted or Witch, but you don't see the Snake Eye monsters, you don't have a way to get to the Snake Eye monsters. So I just personally think this deck is finally dead. I haven't seen any toppings with Snake Eye since the ban list. I haven't personally been looking, but I also haven't seen them just come across my feed and all that. So I just personally think that this deck is finally dead. Feel free to prove me wrong. I've seen a lot of people trying to cope and put like Parallel Exceed in the deck so that way they can just kind of continue to link climb regardless, and some like other weird shit like 1-for-1. I've seen 1-for-1 kind of making a return so they can try and maybe see other plays. I just don't think that's good card economy with the fact that the Snake Eye cards already work how they do, and also 1-for-1 is not searchable. Overall, I think this deck is officially dead. Now, Fire King, pure Fire King, I think is still a pretty decent deck. The Ulcanex is still crazy. Like, yes, the deck doesn't have OSS, so it can't run like the Wanted package like it would normally want to. It can't run like OSS to bridge into Snake Eye stuff because it, you know, it's pure Fire King. But overall, the deck still pretty good. Pure Fire King is a deck that was kind of doing its thing during Snake Eye format. However, at the end of the day, Snake Eye was always better because it was Snake Eye. But now that Snake Eye's dead, Fire King is, you know, it's not bad. It's an okay deck. Overall, I think there's just better options because Shifter is running around in the format. And there will be decks that are not the best deck in the room. There'll even be rogue decks that are running Shifter. So it's like Fire King just can't play under Shifter. They can play fine under Mulch Army. So, you know, there's that. But overall, I think the deck is just, it's fine. It's not crazy. It's not bad. It's just fine. Kashtira, Fiendsmith. We've seen this deck kind of make a rise since the YCS right before crossover, and now the YCS at crossover. We've seen Fiendsmith just kind of doing its own thing officially with a Kashtira engine or Kashtira with a Fiendsmith engine, whichever way you want to look at it. But overall, the name of the game for this deck is just hand traps. It is just spamming out as many hand traps as possible, so that way you can just kind of put up big bodies on your turn and win the game. The deck still does good. It did good at YCS Anaheim, although we saw, at least from Joshua Schmidt, we saw the Magical Musketeers over the Kashtira cards. Kashtira cards are just crazy in this format. Kashtira is just very good at a mid-range format. The Unicorn goes hard against Malice. Just ripping a card from your opponent's extra deck just means you're losing one of your Malice monsters. It doesn't do much against like Ryal because they do play 2 Detonator and they do play 2 Duo Drive minimum. So it's like not crazy in that department, but also it can go really good against like other Fiendsmith decks that aren't running 2 Requiem or like 2 Sequence. Overall, I think this deck is still pretty good, like tier 1. It's still going to be like a top competitor. Just again, like the Kashtira cards go crazy in a mid-range format, which is exactly what we're in now. We're not like in Wombo combo format anymore. Now we're just like end on Detonator pass, like with the field spell. Like that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. Then we have Labyrinth. See, I keep seeing people talk big game about Labyrinth, and Labyrinth does do good in like a mid-range format where things aren't just going crazy, but I haven't seen anything yet. I think there was one Labyrinth top at Anaheim. I could be wrong, but I think Labyrinth is also just kind of tier 2. It has the potential to be better than what we have seen so far, and definitely better than what we've seen in the last little while. It has obviously no hits because it's not a crazy deck, but it's also, like I said, it's good in a very like down-to-earth, like mid-range format. And also people keep saying, and I haven't seen it yet personally, but people keep saying that this deck goes hard against the Ryal matchup. Like it just bodies Ryal. I would love to see it, but I've been told. Next is Malice, and you know, I'm willing to admit when I am wrong. All up to the release of Crossover Breaker, I was preaching that Malice was going to be better than Ryal. And I do think it has the potential to be better than Ryal still. However, what we were not expecting was Ryal having a fun little synchronicity with Fiendsmith. And yeah, we weren't expecting that. So Malice, however, is also a more complicated deck to play. It takes a lot more thought into your link climbing, your like link downgrading, because sometimes you go from a 3 to a 2. And just kind of the plays overall. The deck does not lose to, but has to very meticulously think about what plays it's going to make, because it does heavily play into Nibiru, and they have to basically be able to set up before they hit Nibiru range. But they also have to have an engine that coincides with it in case they do get hit with Nibiru, so they can still extend. I've seen some cool engines being played. Obviously, we saw the Malice Kashtira build top at YCS Anaheim, which, by the way, all of you that were commenting in that video thinking I was fucking crazy, y'all fucking funny. That deck topped the first event that it was legal, and it's probably going to continue to top. Malice Kashtira is definitely one of the plays, because it does kind of give the deck that ability to crack back if they do get hit with Nibiru in some manner. The deck is just very powerful, but the deck also, Malice just has a lot of ability to play with some other cool engines. I'm personally playing an engine that I will make a deck list on later this week that I'm very much a fan of. There's just a lot of like cool stuff that this deck can do and like mesh with. However, again, it does heavily lose, or not lose to, but it has its weaknesses. Nibiru is a big one, but Lancia is the biggest one. If this deck cannot banish, it doesn't lose, but it's very hand dependent. It is very, very hand dependent on whether or not Lancia auto wins the game against this deck. But despite that, the deck's still tier 1. I think that Malice is going to be one of the top dogs of this current format, simply because it does a lot, and if you don't have Nib or Lancia in post side, then and they just get to go off, then they're probably going to win. This deck sets up some really good stuff with like Terahertz and the Decivermin Grave. They can set up IP or Code of Soul depending on what they decide to run. We're seeing some experimentation with Meow Mine being like a bounce back. There's some cool stuff this deck can do, so it's definitely a deck you need to have on your radar. And the deck that I am going to be playing this current format, there's some really cool stuff with this deck. Mermail Water. This deck's had no hit. This deck will probably do pretty well in a mid-range format where there's not a lot going on, but the deck has the ability to hand rip, has the ability to water statue lock you. There's some just really cool interactions with this deck, and overall I think again it's still tier 2. There's not a lot different to say about this deck from the last video. It does good stuff. The issue is the deck cripples to 2 or 3 hand interactions, and Unfortunately, I don't think we are leaving that form of format anytime soon. We are still seeing 15 plus hand traps in the upcoming format. So because of that, Mermail probably won't see massive success, but it will probably see toppings at regionals and possibly even toppings at YCS if it has a good pilot. A deck that I keep forgetting to mention in the past few tier list videos that has seen tops at regionals in the last while is Millennium Exodia. I think this deck's a good rogue deck. It's really good against Mulch Army. It plays very well under Mulch Army because I think they only summon the once from the extra deck usually. It has a big spell negate, has a very, very massive win con of an OTK, and just can kind of play a lot of cool cards. So overall, I think this deck is still a viable strategy as a rogue strategy. It will continue to see tops at regionals. Haven't seen a top for it at a YCS yet in the upcoming format, but there's potential to be there. Also, it's a shifter deck. It can play under shifter. It plays shifter. So obviously, it will see success. Mimighoul is yet another deck that can play shifter. They don't like playing under shifter, but they can. But there's some really cool thought process here with Mimighoul, where the current best decks in the format are Malice and Ryal. Both decks need to have their monsters face up to be able to make materials, and they are very low to the ground when it comes to what they are capable of doing. And Mimighoul, if you just flip the Ext or the Dormouse face down, and they don't have a way to extend past that, they probably just pass. So yeah, and then on top of that, also Mimighoul has the ability to put monsters onto your board. So, the Cashier engines immediately shut off because they can't just special summon Unicorn if they have a face down slime on their board or whatever. So I think Mimighoul is also still a good rogue contender. It still has its weaknesses. However, the biggest weakness in the last format was Diabellstar. The issue with Mimighoul was always that, oh, I put a monster on my opponent's board, and then they just go Diabellstar, send the face down monster to the graveyard to special summon it to the field. So they never got the flip effects. Well, Diabellstar's going to be a little less prevalent in this current format. So I think there's still potential there. There's not going to be a whole lot of cards in the current format that can get rid of that face down. So they have to be very smart about how they, perform their plays. But overall, I think Mimighoul still has the ability to, perform pretty well in this upcoming format. For the next Fiendsmith deck, I forgot to put Engraver's face on here, but it's Magical Musketeers, Fiendsmith, and it's just, it's another Fiendsmith deck. It's going to kind of do the same thing as the Unicorn. However, they're running Magical Musketeer cards. I think personally, this is my personal opinion, this is a little weaker than the Fiendsmith Kashtira deck. I just think it does a little bit less. When I was watching Joshua Schmidt play it during YCS Anaheim, it just felt like it was doing less than the, summon Unicorn, sit on Unicorn, and then, go Fiendsmith combo from there. But it's still performed very well, so congrats to Joshua Schmidt for his topping, of course. But overall, I felt like this was a little bit weaker than the Kashtira version of the deck. Rescue Ace is another deck we need to talk about because it got hit on the ban list. And by hit, I mean they got Airlifter back to 3. However, it kind of got hit still. The Rescue Ace deck was definitely one of the decks that benefited from OSS and its shenanigans, being able to summon out the Hydrant or bridge the Rescue Ace cards into the Snake Eye cards was just overall a very powerful, mechanism. And because they lost OSS, they brought back Airlifter to 3. So now we're kind of back to pure Rescue Ace, and because of that, I think Rescue Ace is going to be more of a rogue strategy because they don't have the ability to use OSS and Wanted for draw power or searching power. But also, if they're running Sinful Spoil stuff, they might as well run the Azamina cards and blah, 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 blah. But overall, I think the deck still is fine. It plays under Mulch Army perfectly fine. It is able to set up a set 4 pass, essentially, with Turbulence. And, one of those cards, I believe, is it makes the monster unable to be used as material, which can be very powerful against the current decks where, it's Link Focus and Xyz Focus. So there is still some cool application with Rescue Ace. We'll just have to see. I'm willing to be wrong on this one, say more tier 2 strategy, but I think it's more of a rogue personally. Ritual Beast, I'm still sticking by what I said in the last video. I think Ritual Beast is still just going to be fine. It's not going to be crazy. Obviously, there are shifter decks in the format, so, if you go Ritual Beast and you activate Shifter and you're going to Malice, they're just going to be okay, that's fine. But overall, Ritual Beast, if you just summon Protos, call Light on Ryal, you win. If you call Dark on Malice, you win, because they're just not going to be able to summon anything to the board. But obviously that relies on the Protoss line. Ritual Beast does definitely die to too many forms of interaction. However, you have to be smart with the interactions. Obviously, imperming the Elder doesn't change the fact that they still get the extra normal summon. So you have to be like smart about where you're hand trapping this deck. But overall, I think it's still a decently powerful deck. And obviously with all these shifter decks running in the format, this is one of those decks that also doesn't care if their shit gets banished. So overall, I think it's a fine deck. We're going to talk about Ryal and Ryal Fiendsmith. I accidentally put Unicorn in the image, but that's supposed to be Engraver. We're talking about Pure Ryal and Ryal Fiendsmith. Pure Ryal, they're both in the same tier. They're both perfectly fine. Ryal is most certainly the best deck in the current format. We are not in a tier 0 format, despite what other Yugi tubers will probably have you believe. I'm not here to doom post you. This deck is powerful, but it does not dominate the entire format powerful. Overall, I mean, like, the deck it has its weaknesses as well. Like Pure Ryal, if they go duo drive and you imperm them and they don't have any follow-up, they probably just scoop there. Or not scoop, but they pass. And duo drive pass is really nothing. And also on top of that, you know, D-Barrier, Colic Seas, they're not really playing all that much. Now, if they're playing the Fiendsmith package, it's a little different because then they have some link monsters to coincide with that. But you could also just run like Simul Archfiends and call, and you know, then they can't, you know, overly extend into links or Xyz monsters. Which means they're going to have to probably just pass on like Detonator or something. However, the deck has very strong application because even if you out their board, they can just kind of bring it back with the plugin. They can bring like the Detonator and then plug a monster into it. And then Detonator also, I believe, on summon can attach like a monster from the graveyard to itself. So they just attach the aggregator. It's not a once per turn nor a once per chain. Obviously, the field spell is really crazy because they don't activate it, so and they can just negate a monster's effect wherever in the chain. So chain blocking is basically irrelevant against this deck. But once you clear the board, and if they don't have the plugin or you have a way to stop it, honestly, this is fine. The deck also does just brick at times. Now, the Fiendsmith package remedies this a little bit more because normal summon Lacrima actually isn't that bad against this deck because they don't need their normal summon. They can special summon a bunch of shit. Also, cool little fun fact is that Ice's normal summon effect does not lock them into Xyz or ranks. So yeah, you know, there's that. They run Exciton Knight, which is a light fiend, so it's like they can summon Exciton Knight, clear the board, link it into Fiendsmith stuff, and sure, they can't kill you, but they just wiped your board. So there's just some really cool like interactions with this deck and the Fiendsmith package that you know, some of us just weren't expecting. This kind of came out of left field for a lot of us. But yeah, this deck's just, it's powerful, and it's going to be kind of like the best deck in the room until either Malice gets figured out or another list comes around, which we probably won't see until late March, early April. But also on top of that, the 7th Tachyon card will probably be out, if I'm correct, before we get our next list, which means this deck's going to get even better. But we also have Ad Ignisters coming out in, I believe, like April, which will make Malice even better. So there's some cool stuff, you know, lying in wait for these decks. But overall, Ryal is, for now, the better version of the deck with, you know, Malice being a close contender. Our good friends, the Tempais, which, as we saw at YCS Anaheim, everyone was so happy for these hits. So this deck officially has 1 Sengen Summoning, 1 Sengen Kaiman, and 1 Tempai Dragon Chundra. They have lost so much consistency, and yet people are still trying to make it work. Instead of all of these, you know, 1-card starters, they're just putting in more hand traps and board breakers on the chance that they see their 1-card starters. So it's like, oh my god, just make it stop. Stop playing this deck. Yeah, people are mad because the deck got hit because it was the one budget option. Nah, there's a lot of budget options. You just want to play the one that you didn't have to think with. No, fuck this deck. Goodbye. If you're still playing this deck, you're coping. Simple as that. This deck is, for the most part, dead. There are obviously arguments to be made. Well, oh, we have 3 Cerulean, we had 3 Fualos, so it's like, oh, well, you know, we can just find our starter. If I don't let you draw and you don't find your starter on the first hand, you're fucked. Overall, I think this deck is pretty much dead. You could maybe make an argument for Rogue, but I will not argue any higher. If you try to argue higher, I will just ignore you. You're wrong. Simple as that. This deck has lost so much consistency. Voiceless Voice, I think, is a pretty good tier 2 option. Voiceless is very good in a mid-range format. However, Detonator is kind of a bitch for this deck because they have a lot of continuous spells like prayers, and if they just activate it, Detonator pops it, you don't resolve it. So they have to kind of get like the pieces on the board, but at the same time, it's like, oh, ritual summon, use low as material, and you summon out Skull Guardian 1, low 2, and then just go Detonator, pop Skull Guardian before low hits the board. So there's a little complication there, but it is possible for this deck to do pretty well. It always struggled going second, but the boards are weaker in comparison to last format. So I think this deck will see some success again. White Forest Runic or just White Forest, you could kind of use either one of these. I think this is just Rogue for now. Until we see the Supreme Darkness support, I think this deck is going to, once again, take a bit of a back seat. But it could probably still see some success. It is a pretty decent deck still, so I think putting it in Rogue is perfectly fine. Yubel, I think, is going to be tier 2 still. Yes, we saw Phantom of Yubel go to 1. However, the deck is still capable of working with that. They have 3 of the Spirit Gates again, so they still have 2 extra 1-card starters in the deck again. And also, if you manage to like try and nib them and they use their Phantom of Yubel, they can just use Nightmare Throne, put Phantom of Yubel back into the extra deck, so it's like fine. So they're not going to really be struggling all that much. I think this deck is still going to be a big threat. The issue is that Yubel, when they go first, if you don't hit them at all, you're not killing them, especially with some of these lower to the ground decks like Ryal and Malice. It's going to be a little bit difficult. However, Yubel does not play under Shifter at all. They don't play under Fool Loss at all. Fool Loss is in every deck. Shifter is in the top 2 decks minimum. Malice is constantly playing it, whether they main it or side it. I think maining it's bad, but I've seen some people topping with it in main. Ryal probably has it in side, so it's like Yubel just can't play under Shifter at all. So, yeah, there's still capability of Yubel being good, though. And that's really it with the tier list. As you can kind of see, despite the fact that there are only technically 3 decks in the tier 1, the tier 2 options are still very good options. They're still very popular. And as we saw at YCS Anaheim, we're kind of in a diverse format. Like, yes, we have the definitive like best 2 decks, which is Ryal and Malice, but there's still room for other decks to succeed, unlike in Snake Eye format, where it was just pretty much Snake Eye and then Tempai and Yubel, and like maybe one guy slipped in through the cracks. But overall, like, this is pretty fine. Let me know in the comments down below if I missed a deck, or maybe just didn't give one of the decks the love it deserves. No, I will not be giving Tempai any more love. That deck was cancer, and I'm glad it's gone. But other than that, don't forget to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, trying to hit 2K before the end of the year. And other than that, I'll see you all in the next video. See ya!